Every day, when you browse the internet, you share identifiable information about your device and browser that companies use to target you with advertising and track your activity across the web. If you think that clearing your cookies regularly and using a VPN will save you, think again. Tracking technology is getting more and more advanced. Your strategies for defending yourself should also follow suit. What is browser fingerprinting? Browser fingerprinting, as the name suggests, is a way for websites to help uniquely identify you by your browser configuration. When you visit a website, you're automatically and passively sharing your device's configuration. Each device's configuration is subtly different, making it possible to identify someone based on their specific setup. Think of it like a detective observing a person's gait, clothing choices, or wear patterns on their shoes. Unlike traditional browser cookies, which you are able to delete, these characteristics are inherent to your setup. It's information that your browser reveals each time you visit a website.
So browser fingerprinting is actually something that you can't really stop. Like your browser will give out information. You can resist it. So it's kind of better to have like an imperfect protection than no protection at all.
Most people are familiar with cookies. Most likely because you've had to click through one of those annoying cookie banners before. Cookies operate very simply. When you visit a website, they are stored on your device so that you can be recognized later. Easy to delete. But browser fingerprinting?
The issue with browser fingerprinting is that it doesn't care so much about state anymore. Every time you go on a web page, and if this web page has a script that is trying to create a browser fingerprint, then even if you clear and reset completely your browser, it will still give out the same information about the browser.
Advances in privacy-respecting browsers have made tracking via cookies much harder. Most browsers have been implementing first-party partitioning of cookies, which has neutralized third-party and cross-site tracking, which includes cookies. Trackers and advertising companies are moving to a more insidious and invisible way to track you across the web. Instead, using unique and identifiable traits of your configuration to track you. With that being said, how does this tracking technology work? What specific information are websites collecting about your browser and computer configuration? Well, it's a vast array of seemingly innocuous details. Your screen resolution, the specific operating system and browser version you are running, the unique list of fonts installed on your computer, and even subtle nuances of your graphics card and audio drivers through technology like WebGL. Individually, these characteristics might not be highly identifiable, but a combination of these minor differences forms your highly unique browser fingerprint. Think of it like this.
So there is things like your browser screen size, not only the page content size, but also the screen size. And there is a lot of information that you can get from your hardware. And mostly the combination of, let's say, the hardware and also software, like the list of fonts that you have, all this information put together will create this browser fingerprint and most probably will make it unique.
Even two seemingly identical devices can have subtly different fingerprints due to minute differences in their hardware and software, such as the list of installed fonts changing due to installed software and variations in GPU manufacturing. While you may have seen websites that claim to check your fingerprint online, they often use a term called entropy or uniqueness to score you. But what does that actually mean? And is a lower score always better?
So if we take the example of a coin toss with head or tails, they both have like 50% of probability. So in this case, where there is a uniform distribution, we have what is called maximum entropy. And the entropy has a value of 1. But if we take another situation where the probability to end up with tails is 95% and the probability to end up with head is 5%. Here, the entropy is now approximately 0.3. It might seem better because 0.3 is lower than 1. But if we come back to our crowd of browser users, those people in the 5% will actually be much more identifiable. So here, lowering the entropy has a worse outcome for part of our users.
Entropy is a useful tool, but it's far better to think of resisting fingerprinting by reducing buckets and evening out distribution across them. That's why you shouldn't put too much stock in tests that claim to check your fingerprint.
There are some websites where you can check your browser fingerprints and they give you figures about entropy, and these are basically wildly incorrect because the data sets that are used is too small and too skewed because it depends on the type of people that are visiting and running the test, and it's mostly people just trying, tweaking a bit and then just trying again and again, and so it's not representative at all. So these numbers should not be taken at face value at all.
The point isn't to achieve a certain amount of entropy or uniqueness, but to blend into a large crowd of users, making you indistinguishable from other people who are also trying to protect their privacy. The business of tracking. So why are companies so eager to collect and track your browser fingerprint? Well, it fuels the trillion-dollar advertising and data brokerage industry, allowing them to create detailed and correlated profiles of your interests, habits, and purchasing history, which can be sold, traded, or used for highly targeted advertising.
The business actually of browser fingerprinting is becoming bigger and bigger year on year. I think there was one website that were announcing that the last year their business grew by 3,000%, for example. So we can see how a problem it is today.
It's clear that the increasing growth of these browser fingerprinting businesses isn't coincidental. It's perfectly aligned with browsers implementing first-party cookie partitioning, which has forced companies to move towards other methods of identifying users.
When you talk about browser fingerprinting, there are valid reasons to do that. For example, if you're trying to fight against bots or commit fraud, basically, browser fingerprinting can be used to try to block these actors. So that's actually a good thing. And these days, even now, there are some browser fingerprinting scripts that are trying to stop AI scrapping, which is becoming kind of a big issue for a lot of websites. But obviously, since it can also be used to track, then we still need to do something about it.
However, the line between invasive tracking and site protection is incredibly thin, and the line is becoming blurrier as companies are also using it for advertising and marketing. How to fight back? So this might sound quite scary, an invisible form of tracking that you seemingly can't prevent. However, there is a way you can fight back. The single most important step you can take starts with a critical choice: your web browser. It's not about installing an extension or tweaking a setting, but choosing a browser that radically alters how you fundamentally interact with the internet.
It will, of course, be to use a browser that basically fights against browser fingerprinting. And for that, there is few options. To make the protections against browser fingerprinting effective, you need that to be coming from the browser directly. So basically, you want a browser that has a strategy to fight against browser fingerprinting. And that basically means today, Firefox, if you use it with ETP in strict mode, because that will enable the browser fingerprinting defense, or browser based on Firefox, Tor browser or Mullvad Browser, which have even more advanced fingerprinting protection and maybe more strict than Firefox with ETP. And then you also have Brave, which has this concept of shields. So if you enable that, or if they are enabled on your browser, then you will have some kind of protection.
A fingerprint-resistant browser places back the control into your hands. instead of involuntarily sharing information about your configuration with websites and allowing them to profile you. One technique that helps to defend against fingerprinting is standardization, where configurations are standardized in an attempt to make you appear as identical as possible to all users of that browser. There will still be minor differences, but this will help you blend into a massive crowd of users. Another technique to fight against browser fingerprinting is randomization. There are two reasons to randomize. The first is to fool some scripts which make it harder for trackers to re-identify you. The second reason is because sometimes, when it's hardware related, it's the only practical solution.
To fight against browser fingerprinting, you want to be part of a crowd of users that are using similar defenses. If you think about operating systems, for example, we have like 4 operating systems that are possible, and we want to limit everything to 4 operating systems. So there is less buckets of people using with operating systems. So there are some things that you can hide, and there are things you can't. Operating system is something that you can't hide. Something that you can change, for example, is a web page can ask about the list of fonts that are available from a browser. And in Tor browser and Mullvad Browser, this list of fonts is like limited. So basically it will not give more information on one device or another device.
By hiding, obscuring, and randomizing common data points in your browser configuration, these browsers make it significantly harder for trackers and advertisers to pinpoint you specifically. But what about VPNs and extensions? Do they help too?
So no, VPN can only hide your IP address, so it will not have like any influence as part of the browser fingerprint that is being like given back to a web page asking for it. Even though you could say that the IP address can be part of a browser fingerprint. That's why, for example, like any serious VPN will tell you that using a VPN is not enough, and you need to also have like ideally like a browser that is resisting fingerprinting.
While a VPN is important for hiding your IP address from websites you're visiting, it doesn't have an effect on your browser fingerprint. That isn't to say it's not important to protect your IP address, as this can also be used to track you across the internet. Instead, think of it as another tool in your privacy tool belt that needs to be combined with a fingerprint-resistant browser to complement the protection. So what about extensions? Do they have any impact on your browser fingerprint?
Potentially. Basically, any extension that can interact with a page can potentially be fingerprinted. It's why we're recommending, for example, with Mullvad and Tor browser, to not install extensions. But there are some extensions that are perfectly fine. They don't have like the permissions to interact with the page. The problem is that right now it's very hard to be certain and to find that information, because even the permissions which a web extension will ask sometimes will be like, I want to access all the websites, and obviously maybe it's not doing anything nefarious, or maybe it's going to only interact with a single website, but you have no way of checking that.
Unfortunately, many extensions, even privacy-focused ones, can inadvertently expose unique data points which can make your browser fingerprint even more distinct. While it may be tempting to install extensions, it's important to weigh the risks of doing so with the benefits you receive from installing them. The tracking arms race. Unfortunately, the online tracking industry is an ongoing arms race. Tracking methods are constantly evolving and finding new ways to identify users. Fingerprint-resistant browsers are constantly adapting in order to counter them.
If every incremental defense that we put into place makes it more difficult for mass surveillance and tracking, and at some point, if a method to track becomes too costly, then those companies will give up. To give you an example to show that some protections are actually effective, these days, if you're using a VPN, then YouTube will require you to log in, which is basically a clear sign that they can't properly track VPN users. So resisting actually hurts their tracking business. And every time you can improve incrementally a little bit, you're making their life that bit much more difficult.
While it may seem insignificant, the more users that are using fingerprint-resistant browsers, the more pressure we put on companies that rely on invasive tracking and surveillance techniques, and make it even more difficult for them to build comprehensive profiles on people.
Online tracking is not limited to the browser. If you're using a smartphone and you have an app, for example, then apps can track you and can actually track you better and have access to better information than simply a browser.
Takeaways. In today's digital age where data exploitation is rampant, your privacy has never been more critical. Yet many believe it is already lost. The fight for online privacy isn't just about your privacy, it's about the struggle for a fundamental aspect of a free and open society. Your awareness, choices, and resistance to invasive and dystopian surveillance can contribute towards the collective effort to improve free expression and individual autonomy online. What are your thoughts on browser fingerprinting? Have you tried a fingerprint-resistant browser? If so, please share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. I would also like to give a big thank you to Rui from Mullvad Browser team for allowing us to interview him and for sharing his thoughtful insights into browser fingerprinting. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into elusive online tracking, please consider subscribing. We wouldn't be able to produce these videos without the support of our members and donators. If you want to support our work, please consider making a donation. See you next time on Privacy Guides.